بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to this podcast series of a commentary on Nahj Al-Balaghah brought to you by Mizan Institute. ثم أنشأ سبحانه فتق الأجواء وشق الأرجاء وسكائك الهواء. So in the previous session, the Imam, he began speaking of the creation of the universe and how when Allah creates in general, when He creates, it's not how it is when we create or when anyone else creates. He doesn't have to think about anything. He doesn't have to figure anything out. He doesn't have to create through movement and motion and all of these things. No. These are things that have to do with us when we want to make something, when we want to quote unquote create something. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's totally different. He also spoke about how Allah had knowledge of all those things that He was going to create. He knew what is needed for them and the boundaries of each and all of these things. Now the Imam begins speaking about the creation of the universe itself. So he gets more into detail here. And so there are some points I want to share as a little introduction before we actually get into the content. Number one is that when the Imam is speaking, you get this feeling that he's standing and watching a phenomenon take place. Okay, it's as if he's standing to the side watching how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating the universe, and He is describing for us and painting for us a picture of what that's looking like. So He might use words and terms that were understandable for people back then. He's saying, look, this is what I'm observing, as if I'm giving you an account, a report of what's going on, so to speak. So here, brings me into another point, that as we go through this literature, there are some terms that are used by the Imam that some have taken to be metaphorical or symbolic of something else, while others might take it literally. So that's something also to keep in mind here. And I will point out some of those as we go along. So what we want to do actually is go through this part of the khutbah, and every person, will have their own opinion on how to interpret what the Imam is describing for us here. Another point that I want to make is that when you look at the translation of this part of the sermon, I personally believe that it's not that accurate. Some parts are very nicely translated. Other parts, in my very humble opinion, fall short of getting the actual point across. And I might point a few of those out as well as we go on. There will be some parts that I will point out how there are different opinions on what this exactly means. Maybe a couple instances I'll share with you as well. It's not like all the interpretations here are the same. There's different scholars, different commentators on Nahj Al-Balaghah. They have different views on certain parts of this, or different ways of explaining and translating even the Arabic. At the same time, we have a bunch of ahadith as well. We have to keep this in mind, that sometimes might even seem contradictory to what Nahj Al-Balaghah is saying. And so each commentator, each mufassir and sharih of the Nahj Al-Balaghah has tried to explain in their way, or at least some of them have tried to reconcile and explain in their way how these are not contradictory to each other and what each of them is saying. But I do want to say this, brothers and sisters, this is a tough subject. It has to do with science. The Imam is not using scientific terms. The Imam here is speaking vaguely, as you shall see, inshallah. And so it gets very hard to try to make sure that everything is being said. We find something in science for it, okay? I'm not saying that what he says goes against science. What I'm trying to say is that it's going to be hard to necessarily identify everything that he's saying with a scientific finding. But that is not the job of the likes of myself. I mean, there are people out there who can do a much, much better job when it comes to identifying and saying, oh yeah, this might have to do with this scientific finding. This has to do with that scientific theory. And sometimes maybe even there might not be anything that can be said in that regard, and we just put our hands up in submission and we say we can't figure this one out. And finally, I want to say that this khutbah, you might find pieces of it with the same wordings almost in other khutbahs of Nahj Al-Balaghah, at least one or two other ones as well, which shows that this is something that the Imam, when he's explaining it, it really is as if he's explaining something that he's seeing to us. And that's why the same wording is repeated again and again. There are some ideas on this part of this sermon, or this part of this sermon at least, And so some might point out that, okay, we have little bits and pieces of this sermon in other sermons, and because there's an overlap in the wording, then this shows that yes, this part of the khutbah probably is from the imam, because if it was just this one that has this wording, that would be one thing. But if it is repeated again and again in other parts of the of Nahj al-Balaghah, then that is a nice strong clue that these are actually things that the imam has said. These are all very technical discussions we don't want to get into. We just want to try our best to understand this part of the khutbah in plain and simple terms, inshallah. So with that, let us begin. The imam here, it says that he said, ثُمَّ أَنْشَأَ سُبْحَانَهُ فَتْقَ الْأَجْوَاءِ وَشَقَّ الْأَرْجَاءِ وَسَكَائِكَ الْهَوَاءِ. So three things here that have to do with each other. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what did he do? He expanded the atmosphere and space. Okay, so if he's going to create a universe with celestial bodies in it, with all these planets and whatnot, then there has to be space first. So it says that he expanded space. He expanded the atmosphere, let's say. Fatq al-ajwa. Now, right from here, some might say that, this whole part of the khutbah, as we go through it, and I might bring this up again later, is talking about the Big Bang. Well, we don't have anything necessarily that will dismiss the Big Bang theory in our literature. Some might say that our literature doesn't support the Big Bang theory. Well, we'll have to find literature that goes against it and dismisses it. Some might believe that there is, some might believe that there is not. This is a scientific matter. Personally, based on the little bit of reading here and there that I've done, I have noticed that I haven't noticed too many scholars dismiss in its entirety this theory and this Big Bang theory. So some might identify this part of the khutbah with the Big Bang. Others might not. I'm just saying, just putting this out there because, as I said in the beginning, I will give some examples of what some say. All right, so expanding the atmosphere, expanding space, the universe, they say, is just growing and growing and growing more and more, even as we speak. All right, so Allah is creating space because within space you can put matter. All right. Fatq al-ajwa wa shaqq al-arja. Shaq means to tear something apart, to separate something. We have Surah Inshiqaq that begins with the same root word. So arja means the corners of something, the far ends of something. And so it says that he expanded the atmosphere and he tore open or split open its corners and it's the surroundings of space. Okay? Some might say, that shows that, maybe this is something ongoing. Well, who knows? But what we do know according to this is that Allah focused on that part of the universe as well, the corners, the surroundings, the limits and borders of it, and he's expanding all of that, splitting it open, tearing it open, however you like to, whatever verb you would like to use there. وَسَكَائِكَ الْهَوَاءِ. The different layers of the atmosphere and air as well, they've said. This is how they've translated this and explained it. So in this first line, we have three different things that the Imam is pointing out. One is talking about expansion. Two, the corners and boundaries of the universe, or the space that the universe is located in. And number three, the different layers of this space and atmosphere. So from all of this, some of the commentators have said we can conclude that the first creation of God, when it comes to the material realm and of existence, is space itself, that he created space according to this. So now the space is there. So what does Allah do now? Because now things have to come into existence, correct? فَأَجْرَى فِيهَا مَاءً مُتَلَاطِمًا تَيَّارُهُ مُتَرَاكِمًا زَخَّارُهُ. This next line has two things in it that it talks about that are very similar to each other. So what did Allah do? According to the khutbah here, it says, he flowed into it water whose waves were stormy. Mutalatiman. Mutalatim comes from latum. Latum means when you strike something. Mutalatim means it's striking back and forth itself in this case and in this context. This water is stormy. Mutalatiman tayyaruhu. That its waves were not just normal calm waves. This water that Allah is now flowing into the space that he's created is one that is stormy, is one that is is striking itself and, probably making a lot of noise as well. مُتَلَاطِمًا تَيَّارُهُ. Now, here some have said, this water that is stormy, what can we identify this with a high pressured gas? But because back then they didn't really talk about these things, as I said before, science back then wasn't the way it is today, if there was any science back then in that part of the world. So the Imam might be using this, ma'an, which means water. Now, of course, doesn't mean H2O in this context, they've said. Most people say that H2O isn't meant here, it's a liquid. But some have said, no, if it's that stormy and it's moving that quickly, then it might even just be a gas. But because they don't have a term for it, the Imam is using the word liquid or ma or water for it. Okay, so that's also another example of how some have identified certain things that the Imam has said with scientific matters. All right, mutarakiman zakharuhu, whose surges leapt one over the other. Okay, so this water as if is eating itself up, and it's just so stormy. And so the Imam here illustrates that for us in this way. So these are two things the Imam says about this water. Let's move on now. حمله على متن الريح العاصفة والزعزع القاصفة. And the translations that I'm reading are from the famous translation of Nahj Al-Balaghah, but some parts I'm not gonna use the translation. But so far I've liked the ones that I've read for you. These ones I personally like them and I think they are doing a good job of translating what the Imam is saying here. All right, so we're moving on now. This water, if it's stormy, if it's striking itself as if that wasn't enough, it says Allah, He loaded this water on a dashing wind. على متن الريح العاصفة. Now, عاصفة is more than dashing, I would say. It's عاصفة means it crushes. So that's how powerful this wind is. Now, of course, here again, some have said wind might mean something else. Okay, I don't know if we'll get to that later, if I bring it up later or not. But yeah, they've said wind is something else here, not necessarily a wind. We'll talk about that if it comes up again. It should come up again. على متن الريح العاصفة, a crushing wind. So this water is now being carried. This water that's not calm itself and is in constant movement and motion, and this is being carried by such a wind that is a crushing wind, وَالزَّعْزَعِ الْقَاصِفَةِ, and breaking typhoons. Now that's what the translation says here. Za'za means a quick movement and something that's shaky and isn't just sitting there calmly. And qasifa, again, just like asifa, means something that it breaks. So now the translation says typhoon. Okay, that's the word that's being used here, but that necessarily doesn't necessarily have to be typhoon. I would say the Imam is using different adjectives here to describe one thing. فأمرها برده وسلطها على شده وقرنها إلى حده. Now this part of the khutbah is like a little harder than I would say the rest. There was a couple opinions on this one that I looked into. Let's see what we have here. There one translation will say, or one explanation I should say, says that this typhoon, this wind, what it had to do was Allah ordered that this wind protect and preserve this water, this liquid, and to connect all of its parts together. Okay? Shad in Arabic, when you tie a knot, that's called shad of the knot. Okay? So now here it says, فَسَلَّطَهَا عَلَى شَدِّهِ, Allah empowered this wind to tie all of this liquid together, keep its parts and particles together, so it doesn't just scatter. وَقَرَنَهَا إِلَى حَدِّهِ, and to keep it within its boundaries and limitations. Okay, so that's one explanation that some have given. Another explanation that I saw was that فَأَمَرَهَا بِرَدِّهِ means that Allah ordered that this water be turned back and forth, left and right, upside down. So once again, it's all being mixed up and stuff. It's not just sitting there motionless. And then وَسَلَّطَهَا عَلَى شَدِّهِ, that Allah allowed this wind to give this water power and force, if you may. وَقَرَنَهَا إِلَى حَدِّهِ and Allah kept it within His boundaries, let's say again. So these are different opinions on what this means. Some have said amaraha biraddihi. Rad in Arabic means to return something back somewhere. So here Allah, it says, some have said that Allah ordered that this wind bring this water back. The translation, if I remember correctly, I think the English translation was saying Allah ordered that it is returned to rain or something like that. So look, there's a lot of different interpretations here for this part of it, and I kind of got the feeling that some of the commentators kind of have skipped getting very deep into discussing what these three items here mean exactly. But all in all, what you get from this is that this water is being shaken more and more and more. الهواء من تحتها فتيق والماء من فوقها دفيق. This part is just saying that the wind blew under it. So there's this liquid we have, and it's as if it's suspended now. Under it is the wind carrying it, and then this liquid that's on top, it says water flowed furiously over that wind. So it's just reminding us again that this water is furious. It's not just sitting there. Once again, some have different way of interpreting this part of the khutbah. I don't want to get into it. I think this should be enough. Yes, I think this suffices. Yeah. So now, going back to a point that I brought up a little bit earlier, and that is that this wind, some have said, hey, if this wind, according to our interpretation, its job is to keep this liquid together, not let it scatter, preserve it, keep its particles together, tie them together. That was the first explanation we gave for these three items here. If that is what is meant, then clearly this, or I don't want to say clearly necessarily, I don't want to put words in other people's mouths, but they say that there's a good chance that what is meant by wind here isn't a wind. This is actually gravity and gravitational pull. There's some type of gravitational pull that Allah put into this wind or into this water that kept it together. This gravity is being referred to as wind. What is Imam Ali supposed to say? They'll say Imam Ali is living in a time where no one knows about these things, right? So what kind of word is he supposed to use? Is he supposed to say gravity? That's for someone else like Newton to discover and talk about. No, the Imam is going to use a term that people can relate to, and then he's describing what that wind's job is. So it's not really wind, it's gravity keeping these things together, and it's a strong gravitational force. Okay. It goes on. ثُمَّ أَنْشَأَ سُبْحَانَهُ رِيحًا. Alright, so far, what did we have? So far, what we had was that Allah created this space, expanded it, and then He flowed in it a liquid, and this liquid is now being carried on a vessel that is a wind. This wind, because it's carrying with it this water that is going to turn into everything. This is the initial matter that is going to make up everything of the universe. This wind is like a fertile wind. Yes, these winds that we have in this dunya, in this world that we live in, usually wind is fertile. What is meant by that? What is meant by that is that it pollinates. It is what carries pollen around and causes reproduction to happen, and so on and so forth. So here, there's a wind that we have that's fertile, so to speak. Meaning what? Meaning it's carrying something with it that is going to be the initial matter and substance for the entire universe. Alright. But then, it says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then created another wind. It says, ثُمَّ أَنْشَأَ سُبْحَانَهُ رِيحًا اِعْتَقَمَ مَهَبَّهَا. Four things the Imam talks about in regards to this wind that sets it apart from your normal everyday wind that we have in this life. Number one, it is sterile. It is barren. Okay. It says Allah made its movement sterile. This doesn't mean that it doesn't move anymore because it's sterile. No, it moves. As a matter of fact, you'll see how much it's going to move. The Imam describes it later. This wind that is moving is a sterile one. It's not carrying with it what that other wind had, but it's going to come and do something to that liquid that first wind we talked about is carrying. Okay, So number one, the difference between this wind and all the other winds, it's a sterile one. Usually winds, as I said, they are fertile winds in the sense that they are pollinating everything else, they are causing reproduction and so on. Adama murabbaha. This wind was one accompanying the water always. Okay, so it's not carrying the water, but it's within it, it's with it forever. Winds usually will die out. This wind is always there. And this might be a reason, brothers and sisters, that some have identified this wind with, or both of these winds with gravity, a gravitational force. I mean, once again, we are not sure about that. It's the opinion of some, or might be the opinion of some, but I'm just putting these out there to think about. وَأَعْصَفَ مَجَرَاهَا. He intensified its motion. Once again, أَعْصَفَ, just like al-asifah that we had a few minutes ago, is a motion that is intense. It's crushing and breaking. أَبْعَدَ مَنْشَأَهَا. This part is a part there that has been interpreted in different ways. All I'll say is this. أَبْعَدَ مَنْشَأَهَا literally means that he made it far and distanced it from its origin. Wherever this wind was originating from, it's far away from it now. But what is it trying to say here? Some have said, what is meant is that Allah spread this wind far and wide. Others might say that this wind is so powerful that it's crossed a long distance and still is going strong, but it's far, far away from its origin. That's how powerful it is. Because when a wind is usually made, it'll die out slowly, of course. But if there's a wind that starts in the east but is still blowing in the west, that is a very strong wind. If it's far from its origin, that shows that it's a very, very strong wind. And so some might say that that is what is meant here. Allah is trying to, or Imam Ali alayhi salam, is trying to say how strong this wind was. فَأَمَرَهَا. So what is the job of this sterile wind? This wind that wasn't bringing with it water like the previous one, but is going to do something to that liquid, that water that was being carried by the first wind. Amaraha. So Allah ordered this second wind, this sterile wind, to do what? بِتَصْفِيقِ الْمَاءِ الزَّخَّارِ. Allah ordered that this wind comes and does tasfiq. Tasfiq, when you, for example, clap your hands, that root is used for this action. When things hit each other hard and they make a loud noise, this is tasfiq. So here it says Allah ordered that this water strikes hard that water that had accumulated, okay, to keep striking it and keep hitting it hard. وَإِثَارَةِ مَوْجِ الْبِحَارِ. Allah also ordered that for this wind to cause big waves, like the waves of the sea and the ocean, within this liquid. فَمَخَضَتْهُ مَخْضَ السَّقَاءِ, or فَمَخَضَتْهُ مَخْضَ السِّقَاءِ. What happens as a result of this wind agitating this water, this liquid, moving it around briskly and forcefully and striking it left and right, turning it upside down? And what happens is that this, just like how curd is made with the sea, curd is made by churning, and those who know, in the old times when they wanted to make butter, what they would do is they would put maybe milk or yogurt in these sacks, and they would beat the sacks and move them back and forth, to and fro, back and forth, and agitate it strongly and forcefully, so that slowly what would happen was this butter, the core of that milk or whatever substance it was, would come out in a more solid form. And so they would extract that from it. So they're extracting it by beating it, by moving it briskly and shaking it very hard. So makhd is a term that's also used for the labor that mother goes through when she's delivering her baby, and she's giving birth to her baby. Okay, فَأَجَاءَهَا الْمَخَاضُ إِلَى جِزْعِ النَّخْلِ. The Quran talks about Lady Maryam alayhi salam, that the pain of labor brought her to a palm tree, and we all know the story there and how miraculously Lady Maryam, she ate dates from that tree. But what's the point I'm trying to make here is that the same root that's used for those pains of that and labor that a mother goes through when she's delivering a baby, that is used here. Makhad, here it says فَمَخَضَتْهُ. So this wind beat this water, this liquid so hard that what happened, that you can probably guess what happens, that something is going to come out of all of this. حَتَّى عَبَّ عُبَابُهُ. This water, this accumulated liquid, it rose up to the point that وَرَمَى بِالزَّبَدِ رُكَامُهُ, that a foam was shot out of this liquid because of all of this pressure that it was under and being beaten from every side and angle and turned upside down and all of that. Yes, it's as if this universe was the result of such a churning, let's say. And some here might say that this is exactly the Big Bang. And so I'm not going to necessarily say that's not the case. Some might say that I identify this with the Big Bang itself. It's like a centrifugal force. You know, these centrifuges, when they're spinning and a force is made to where you have the center of this, whatever it is that's spinning, if it lets go of that which is spinning, it will shoot out. Same thing here. It's as if a centrifugal force was made and this foam eventually shot out. It's like a slingshot. When you're, the old school ones, not these new little pretty ones that people use now. I'm talking about the ones that have a pouch and two strings attached to it. I'm talking about those ones. You put a stone in it and you spin, and then you let go of one of those strings. The pouch releases the stone and it goes with full force away from the point where it was spinning from. That's centrifugal force, they say. So this force was created by that sterile wind, as if spinning this liquid to the point where the foam, this liquid is churned and the foam is released. That which is going to be what this universe is made of. All the objects in this universe, all the celestial bodies in this universe are made from. فَرَفَعَهُ فِي هَوَاءٍ مُنْفَتِقٍ وَجَوٍ مُنْفَهِقٍ. So this foam shot out across the space that Allah had created, and Allah spread it and raised it in this atmosphere that was waiting to be the cradle of this matter. And so Imam Ali alayhi salam, now when he explains all of this, it's as if, as I said, he's watching all of this from afar. He's looking, okay, this is happening, people, this is what's happening. There's a space that's created. There's a liquid that is made to flow within here. There's a wind that's carrying it. Another wind comes and now destroys this wind, this liquid, beats it to death to the point that a foam is given off from the liquid and is cast across the space that Allah had created. He says all of this. This was the initial part of the creation of the universe. Then the Imam goes into the details of this universe. فَسَوَّى مِنْهُ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ. From all of this foam, let's call it, God created these 7 heavens. And so from here on, the Imam goes in describing these the universe itself in detail, inshallah, for our next session. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.